Welcome to Lancefield on the Line. My name is David Lancefield, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Francesca Gino, the Tandon family professor of business administration at the Harvard Business School, the author of 3 books, including the most recent one, Rebel Talent, Why It Pays to Break the Rules in Work and Life, a topic close to my heart. And it's a brilliant book. I loved it so much, actually, I selected it as a top shelf pick in my review of books for strategy and business in 2018. Your research, as you know, because you do it, focuses on why people make great decisions they do at work and how leaders and employees have more productive, creative and fulfilling lives. You are an author of many, many articles and you advise companies as well. And you are most welcome, Francesca.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you.
Fantastic. So we're going to talk about all those topics. We might even talk about you as well as the research, because that's the safe area. We'll talk about that and we'll talk about the book, of course. But I'm recently some research from a mutual friend of ours, Dan Cable, and yourself. You did some research that was fascinating about workplace, I guess, productivity and engagement or lack of it during the pandemic and what it could mean. I don't want to start on a negative note, but I'm curious about what you found, but also what some of the strategies might be to sort of overcome some of the issues. So let's start there.
Dan Cable and I were having many discussions about working from home during the pandemic, and we had lots of theories about the fact that maybe work engagement went up. We've heard from a lot of people saying that they reclaimed their commute, that they had more flexibility around their work. And so we wanted to test whether this was a reality for most people. And what we found by collecting data on over 8,000 people across all states in the United States is that our intuition was wrong. And then in fact, what we see is a decline in work engagement. So to be specific, it's a 16% decline. And we look at it across roles, across industries, across jobs. It's more pronounced for women than it is for men, but a pretty remarkable decrease in work engagements. And so we started asking question, who fares better? And what was surprising is that the people who were able to buffer against this decline are people who looked at this crisis and saw an opportunity. And so rather than feeling threatened and constrained, they reshaped and focused their attentions on the opportunity. And I think what was really interesting to us is that we had all sorts of predictors, demographics, location. We had real data about deaths in the States or policy around lockdown. None of that mattered in predicting the mindset of whether you see the opportunity or the crisis. It really comes down to a choice that you are making and how your leaders are displaying behaviors that seem more like showing an interest in the opportunity rather than the constraints. So that to us was fascinating.
Did you have a sense from your research or perhaps your conversations, how much of that framing was about the individual making that choice and how much of it was about the tonality, the comments of the leaders? And of course, it's going to be a combination of both. I'm curious whether there was a slight, tilt between the individual versus the leader or leaders.
So leaders matter quite a bit in modeling these behaviors. And so what we found is that actually a big predictor of whether you as an individual have this mindset or not is dependent on whether your leader is also demonstrating this mindset. And to me, that's powerful and really interesting because I've been in a lot of conversations where the leaders have almost the narrative of, I'm really nostalgic of the way things used to be. And I want to go back to whatever we had as soon as possible. And you probably heard leaders say the same things or something like it. And I think it comes from a good place, from wanting to reconnect with people, to sort of see something that is more normal, but it doesn't do any good to people when it comes to their work engagement.
You also get a sense that some leaders, I would say this actually, this is based on observation rather than any empirical research, some men in particular, some male leaders, which is the majority, sadly, in terms of gender balance, a lot of them have got a dose of humanity, sometimes through personal circumstances, their own trauma or difficulty, sometimes through just being in situations in the workplace that are more difficult. And it begs the question of, firstly, why it's taken so long, but that's the past. But it begs the question of how they're going to sustain that, frankly, humanity in the future. And I'm just curious in terms of, you study decision making all the time. Leaders are making decisions now as to what they continue to do and indeed what they may stop. Is there any observations around how we sustain some of the better behaviors, if you like, in the post-pandemic period?
What gives me some comfort and confidence is seeing how many leaders are actually having conversations around what it is that we've learned. There is a muscle that got used where we did show a lot of agility during the crisis.
Yes.
How is it that we can hold on to that muscle and develop it further? But there are also lots of leaders who are not having those conversations. And so I think what we're going to see next is going to be really interesting. And my prediction is that the leaders were having those conversations about recognizing that in this moment of crisis, we were able to show agility, and what is it that we can do to keep working that muscles going forward are going to fare much better.
Yes, I can see that. Let's continue this theme then on the workplace of the future, and let's try and be positive about things. You study biases of different shapes and forms. Sometimes they can be positive or negative, although often I'm doing it right now, we often focus on the negative biases. If you like, if you were designing or asked to design a workplace of the future, either in your current role or if you just gave it up, you were rebellious, we'll come on to that, rebellious and said, right, I'm going to start my own organization in the coming year. What biases would you be particularly alive to in designing an effective, productive, fulfilling workplace?
It's a really interesting question. I think what I would try to get at is this bias that when we're curious, we think that that means not getting work done. And it's just not true. It's a bias that we have, a belief that I often see in a lot of people, whether employees or leaders, but it's not true. And so what I would hope in such a position I would do is create an environment where curiosity is truly treasured and cherished. Because what that would mean, I think, is that as a consequence of that, we would also see people having disagreements that are more productive, because rather than just rolling up our sleeves and defending our point of view, we're going to get curious about the perspective of others and how they're different from our own. I think that we would see that people would be more engaged in the work that they do, simply because you're giving them the chances of questioning existing ways of working, as well as the ability to collaborate more effectively across silos. There is work that I've done with some great colleagues at the University of Toronto that shows that when you trigger curiosity in the moment, people are better able to collaborate across functions. And so I feel like I would make curiosity a big part of what the organization would be all about.
That would be refreshing. I'd work for you and with you if you did that.
Thank you.
Because often it's sort of considered the thing you do on a Friday afternoon, or a sort of a luxury or a hobby. And it's curious at the moment, I use that consciously, that there have been a lot of headlines around burnout and overworking in particular organizations, investment banks, professional services firms. Of course, not the one I used to work with and for.
Just to clarify.
Well, no, frankly, there is. I'll be honest, there are elements of it, of course. But a lot of that belief is about just doing more. It's about a sort of input-based model of just doing more hours and so on, which partly comes from the billing arrangements. In some cases, you bill by the hour. But it's also a mindset of, if you went for a wander around and just having a chat with somebody, you're sort of being lazy. And that comes down to reframing what it takes to be productive and effective, and also trust, trust. And I guess you touched there on disagreements. I mean, strong workplaces have, foster a place where you can have, proper disagreements. But how do you do it skillfully, especially in environments now that are arguably more sensitized, given the experiences people have had? They're more genuinely virtual, as we are at the moment. What have you learned about, skillful disagreement?
What I've learned is that there is actually language that we can use that allows us to show others that we're more receptive. And with that comes the fact that if we're the first one to show that we're receptive, others are going to also be receptive, and disagreements are going to end sooner, and they're going to be more productive. So this is work that I've done with a series of collaborators, and what we had the opportunity to do is actually really look at features of language. So I'm going to give you a couple which I think are quite interesting. One is to acknowledging the other person's perspective. And so when we are disagreeing, usually what comes naturally is that I get on the defensiveness and I want to defend my point of view or my argument. I want to show you that I am right and you're wrong.
Yes.
But if we instead go in with this idea of, I'm going to listen to what you have to offer and acknowledge your perspective, then we are showing more receptivity. And that doesn't mean agreeing with you, but is recognizing that there is in fact another perspective, another way of looking at this problem. The other one that usually surprises people is edging your claims. What that means is saying things like, I think that one way to approach the problem is X, rather than saying the right way of approaching the problem is X. That is helpful. And finally, the third one, it is helpful to identify something, no matter how small or maybe obvious, that you agree on, because that allows us to come together on something and then be able to discuss our differences in perspective. And one of the things that surprises people about receptiveness is the fact that when we use it, we're actually more likely to change people's mind. So if our objective in the first place was to actually come in and convince you that I have something valuable to offer, that is a much better approach.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So that's a nice segue to rebels, right? Because, there are situations, that's beautiful, wasn't it? There are situations where you're going to disagree with not just what they say, but who they are and how they interact and so on. Now, I want to talk about some of the concepts and then talk about your own rebellious nature. So you talk about, the different stages of acts that rebels can get involved in. You talk about break, transform, and create, right? Tell me a little bit more about that. But I'm particularly curious about, is having rebel talent and nurturing rebel talent, is that a perpetual state of, if you like, being? Or do you get to the point where you've got enough and you can sort of down dial it? I say that cheekily, but is it an ongoing perpetual state of nurturing rebel talent?
Very good question. So let me start from the break, transform, create. And that is really a motto that came from this very inspiring leader who is the chef and owner of a 3 Michelin star restaurant called Osteria Francescana. It's an Italian restaurant in Modena, Italy. Beautiful restaurant, wonderful dishes, really good cuisine. And it became the best restaurant in the world in 2016. And what this chef did that I think was truly inspiring for me and for others, but also quite courageous, was to go to traditional Italian dishes and reinvent them, come up with his own innovative version of those dishes. And I don't know how much you know about Italians, but I can tell you that 2 things are very true. First, we have lots of rules when it comes to cooking. We might not care about parking illegally or driving fast, but we do care about cooking and the rules that we follow there, from the way we think about pairing certain type of pasta to certain type of sauces, lots of rules that are there. And second, we cherish our old ways, especially when it comes to recipes that have been passed on for centuries. And so here you have a person who went exactly to that context, with curiosity, said, maybe made sense to cook the dish this way 20 years ago, but not today. Let's reinvent this dish with an innovative spin. So just for that, incredibly inspiring. And one of the things that he says, which I think is really powerful as a way of thinking, is that traditions are well-received experiments. So think about it. It's just from the start, they don't get accepted and then we're done for the rest of our lives. We're
they
always
just sort of
in
land,
evolution. Exactly. We're always in evolution. So that I think is just what he embraces in his work and life more broadly.
Yes.
And so that brings me to your second question. I think it's a way of being where we just don't sit with the status quo. We don't become complacent, but we're always looking at life and at work as opportunities for changing and learning, kind of continuously. And when we have that type of mindset, I think we fare better. Not only we're more innovative and creative, but we engage with life and with others at a deeper level. And so that is my argument for all of us to be a little bit more rebels.
I remember, just going back to the workplace, I'll come back to life in a moment. Work is part of life. But I remember reading the book, and I read it a number of times, and thinking that actually it was a very radical manifesto, because it's easy to talk about rebel talent, but then you actually talk about what it actually involves to attract, nurture, develop, reward rebel talent. It is very radical. Because the classic dimension between having, if you like, an exploit and explore portfolios, that sort of, you'll have the innovation unit on the side with the quirky different people, and they'll effectively be measured on the same measures often as the people in the core business or the exploit business, if you like. So you have the theater of rebelliousness, but the reality is they tend to come and go. So rewiring an organization's culture, the DNA of the organization, actually takes a substantial amount of work. And that's why I thought your book, in setting out the examples and the manifesto, was so particularly stimulating. So that was a nice warm up on the workplace. Let's talk about you. So you work for and in, and I sense you're there at the moment, Harvard Business School, which prestigious organization. Some might say, I haven't been there for a while, a touch conservative, as some business schools are. How and where do you rebel in your professional life?
You make me smile, because when the book came out, some people in audiences I was in front of would look at me and say, really? You wrote this book by being a professor at Harvard Business School? And I was very curious about what's behind this question. And to me, it was intriguing as a question, because I always came back to the mission of the school, and it's to train leaders who are going to make a difference in the world. I say, hopefully positive difference. We should add that to the mission just to be sure that everybody agrees on that front. But it's interesting. So that's the mission. How I accomplish it as a member of the community is my own doing. And I have so much flexibility in the choices that I made. And so I actually thought that it was an organization that was giving me a lot of leeway in terms of choosing, how do I apply my curiosity? How do I show up with authenticity? How do I stretch myself? How is it that I can broaden my perspective and leverage differences as I'm going for ways of enhancing that mission? So I always found this question kind of interesting in that respect.
That's fascinating, because actually you're given and you create a lot of space to do what you described, even though there'll be aspects of a business school and any institution that are difficult or challenging, or some would say dysfunctional. I mean, any organization, I'm not picking on any particular one. That is interesting.
Yeah, I'll give you a fun story. Hopefully it's fun stories. It was fun for me, but when the previous dean, Nitin Noria, was the dean of the school, and it happened to be dean for quite a few years, when the book came out, I went to him with a gift. And I got him a pair of red sneakers. And I did so in reference to a story when I showed up in front of a group of 150 executives wearing
Yes, I remember that one.
suit
Yes.
and a pair of red sneakers.
Yeah.
And he opened it up the box, looked at the gift, looked at the shoes, and then he looked at me and said, "Oh, I guess I can wear this in the movie theater." I was like, no. During faculty meetings on campus. That's how you get to embrace it.
Very good. So how do you, I mean, thinking about you personally then, and you think about your own, so you have space to explore, to do amazing things. How do you measure and think about your own impact? And to be clear, and I'm being a little bit chippy, if I'm allowed to be. That's an English word, you know, a bit challenging. Beyond you have amazing citations, and you are a tenured professor who still continues to publish in the best journals, which I'm told is not always the case. But let's not talk about that. But beyond publications, how do you measure and think about your impact when you talk to your husband or your family or others in later in life, and you say, "Hey, I've done a really good job. I think I've done a good job. Done my best. In a nutshell, this is what my impact has been." How would you describe it?
It's a really profound questions that actually I ask myself often, given that I've been living here for 20 years and my family, brother and sister and parents are all in Italy. So it actually a question that I ask, am I here for a reason? And am I making enough impact? And what I think my way of answering that question is knowing that what I write or what I teach truly makes you think differently about how you approach your work and how you approach your leadership. And I'm using the word leadership really broadly because we all get to influence other people we work with. And so the moments where I felt a great potential for impacts are moments where leaders in a variety of organizations or employees came to me and said, for instance, I read the book, I ended up doing a few things differently in light of it. Those are moments where I feel, okay, fantastic. I'm energized, I want to do more of this. And then on the personal side, I'm the mom of 4 small children. And so I often close my eyes and reopen them thinking about when they're going to be teenagers or adults. And I hope I've done enough to teach them about the importance of learning and staying curious, such that when they're in position, whatever they decide to do, but when they're in position of being leaders themselves, they want to embrace these ideas. And so I have this lovely pictures in my mind of looking at them, and I'm an old lady and I'm thinking I am proud of what I'm seeing. So I hope I get there in a few years, many years from now.
Many years. That's wonderful to hear. I mean, talking of which, I remember reading an article of yours where you talked about your own mindset in terms of how you lead your life and not trying to beat yourself up for being too perfect. I think it was a Harvard Business Review article, and it got an amazing reaction. I mean, I'm sure your articles always do get a great reaction, but I remember it really strong reaction. And I had a hunch that it was in part thinking, and I can say that, well, you could say this, but it's easy for me to say. You got this, on the one hand, this person who clearly is brilliant, and, you know, you rose up the ranks, brilliant professor, incredibly impactful, and a very good person. I know people who know you, and they talk very highly of your spirit and your nature, which for me is very important, as well as the title. That's very important, I think. Just, you know, there's a lot of people out there with the title, but not the behaviors. They often go with it. But it was the fact that you could talk about not being perfect, and I was curious as to what motivated you to express that opinion and what you saw in the reaction to it.
I had so many colleagues coming to me, and these are friends, co-authors, colleagues at Harvard Business School who, like me, are parents. And they were struggling so much with things are different, my responsibility, my life at home is different. And I feel as if I'm not living to the high expectations that others seems to have of us. And I kept looking at myself and thinking there is no evidence of perfection in the way I'm living generally, but definitely no evidence of perfection in the way I'm living today. But I'm using some simple strategies that rather than focusing my attention on what's not perfect, you almost create moment of playfulness out of that. And so I felt that I had a message to share that would make hopefully people feel better about their imperfections, since
Relax a
I
bit,
was
relax a bit in their
clearly
life. Yeah.
experiencing a lot of that in my own life.
Yeah, well, good for you. I mean, it's credit to you. Just flipping back to, if you like, your professional identity. I'm always curious to learn more about the frontiers of research and thinking. Whether imagine I'm a new PhD student or an executive who's curious about applying the best in behavioral science and everything else that you do. What would be the one or two areas where you, whether it's your own research or others that you admire, where you think, you know what, this is leading edge, look out for this, or look out for this, it's going to come and use it. So what are the frontiers?
So one is this idea that now we can use algorithms to help us understand a feature of language that are signals of certain behaviors. So
Yes.
earlier I was talking about receptiveness. Part of the reason why I love that research is that one of the people in our team, Mike Yeomans, is an expert on natural processing language. And he was able to create algorithm that could allow us to identify feature of language that signal that behavior. I think that that is just a pot of gold, that we're going to see really great research that allows us to capture important ideas from the way we talk to one another. So I'm excited about that work. I've been looking at it in the context of disagreements, but I think that we could more broadly look at language that we use when we talk to one another, and what does that do to the strength of our relationship, and also how well we work with one another. The second is thinking about this remote or hybrid world.
Yes.
I think that there is an opportunity to try to understand how do we develop a relationship even in a context that is not always one where we interact in person.
Yes.
And one of the things that struck me that I did at the start of the pandemic is looking at organizations that were born remote.
Yes.
And how is it that they function effectively? And so I think probably one of the eye-opening discoveries was that when these leaders or employees took snapshots of their calendars, there was a lot of emptiness.
Yes.
Not a lot of meetings. But I don't know about you, if we take snapshots of people like us and their calendars, often they look like very stacked pancakes with a lot of layers. And so I was struck by how is it that there is a different ways of working that we're not embracing in this remote world. So especially with the transitions back to the office, I think that there is a fascinating set of questions to be asking about how is life going to be looking like.
Yeah, the good thing now is I don't have that corporate calendar, but I think we all used to traipse around the office as we were, with the sort of how packed our calendar was, like a measure of our success implicitly or sometimes explicitly. I do think there's a shift into of having calendars that are empty in terms of the mindset towards outcomes within bounds and within a good culture. But sort of if you trust that people are going to do good work and you're clear about the outcomes and you incentivize accordingly, I think you're more likely to then have that curiosity you talked about earlier and some space to do it. On your earlier point about algorithms, I am aware of some former clients of my old firm who mined customer call center data and are already using it to understand cues of when you call in, how they respond to you, the tonality, the types of responses, and how that garners a good response if you're moaning about your utility bill or anything else. Is live in a really big area at the moment. So that's definitely a fruitful area. My last question, I'm conscious of time and I want to be sensitive to it. We're talking a lot, as you say, about the shift in the workplace in our new hybrid world. There are also some big strategic questions facing organizations as they face difficult economic conditions and so forth. You study decision making, and effectively strategy is about choices and winning, of course, winning for the good, I hope, beyond just shareholder value. What have you learned in your own research that you think could inform better strategies that could benefit us in the future?
One of the things that I have learned is how often strategy and culture do not reinforce one another. In reading some of the literature on this, one of the people I went to is Jenny Chapman at the University of Berkeley. She's brilliant, a great scholar. And one of the things that she constantly says is that culture needs to be strategically relevant. But I often see in real organizations that not to be the case. And in some of the research, you see that disconnect. And I'm saying this in light of the fact that prior to this crisis, many leaders said, well, people are our greatest asset. And in a sense, this crisis was an opportunity for them to really show that. And I think some leaders did.
Yes.
And some organizations and leaders did not. And so it'd be interesting to see how the strategic choices of these two groups are going to be quite different.
Yes.
As people go back to the next chapter or start a new chapter and decide that the evidence that they've collected during the crisis of how they're treated is not consistent with what they were told. And to the extent they might jump to a different type of job. So I think we're going to see an interesting bifurcation, and I'm trying to figure out how to best study it and think about situations where strategy and culture were tightly aligned and situations where they were not.
I'm actually writing something on that topic, or beginning to write something on that topic at the moment.
I'm going to raise my hand to want to read what you are writing on that, since I find that really fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it's hard. I mean, one quick anecdote before we close is that I remember talking and working with a senior executive who'd done brilliant work on culture evolution. Culture is an evolution. It's not something you just build over. It takes years if you're going to do it properly. Initiative, it was scaled and sustained. I mean, it was brilliant. And I just said to him, so are they doing the right things for the right purpose? And literally went white. I mean, he was a sharp guy, a sharp operator, and he wasn't at a sort of a point where he was going to break the business or lose money. But they were just doing lots of good things as opposed to sort of working out where their advantage was. And the strategy had sort of got lost. They were sort of shining the existing business model, if you like, rather than thinking about the next one. Now he realized it and he did some great work, but it's remarkable that somebody so talented could actually just lose that because they were so passionate about the people, and the people are our greatest assets, sort of mantra.
I probably, like you, have seen that really often.
Yes.
Even when I'm brought in as a consultant or an advisor, one of the first things I usually help people with is by asking the questions, what exactly are we trying to solve for? And so that's clarifying the strategy. And it's interesting how we often dive into the work without actually taking a step back and saying, what's our strategy? What are we trying to solve for? Fascinating.
Yeah, and it's hard and it's uncomfortable. We could talk for hours, and I'd love to, but that wouldn't be right. We'll do it some other time. It's been a stimulating, illuminating conversation. I've loved listening to your research, your thinking, your mindset about life and work. So I'm very, very grateful for your time, Francesca. So thank you.
I am so happy that we had this conversation. So thank you for making that happen.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. Thank you.